questions. I mean, one of the topics that I mentioned. How about we begin with this about the Hadith? I think that would be quite interesting. Right, okay, so people, there are two Hadith which we'll be taking a look at. Let's give an overview of this topic. This topic, from a broader perspective, looks at do children who pass away, may Allah make wherever that happens, may Allah make it easy upon their families, Ameen, and grant them ease and replace their sorrows with joy, Ameen. But wherever children pass away, what is the theological standpoint, the stance towards this? Like, do people feel that all children they attain salvation? Or are some children doomed because their parents were non-Muslims? What is the thought about this? Now, this is the greater question. Now, and then there's a hadith in which some people come and ask the Prophet about their mother who would bury certain children alive, certain girls alive, and she buried one of their sisters alive. And the Prophet allegedly says that not only is that woman, the culprit, doomed, but so is the child. Now this then triggers, it kind of unleashes a whole, not just a can of worms, but Pandora's box, people, because what on earth is going on here? Does this mean that children are doomed and ain't children innocent? So what is this on about? So first of all, what is the ruling to this? So let's get that clear, and then we're going to zoom in to this discussion and look at this hadith. So just to be very clear, that children are always deemed innocent from a religious theological standpoint. I don't care what any certain scholars have said. For example, I'll come to that in a moment, but children are always deemed innocent. Okay, from an Islamic viewpoint, they will always have salvation. It does not matter whether they were Muslim, whether they were kafir, non-Muslim, whether they were whatever, from mushrik parents or whatever, there is always that innocence. Okay, this is reinforced on several occasions from the Quranic standpoint. You'll see many verses of the Quran that will address things like that. For example, the verse kullama, when Allah speaks of damnation, wa kullama ulqiya fiha fawjun sa'alahum khazanatuha, that every time a group was doomed, they were asked, alam ya'tikum nadhir, were you not sent somebody to warn you? Qalu bala, they said, indeed, ja'ana nadhir, that a warner came to us. That it was a necessary prerequisite for any kind of judgment. Okay, there's many verses like that. Allah taziru waziratum wizra ukhra, that no soul will carry the sin of another or the burden of another. And then Allah mentions about like children who were buried alive as an example, since we're speaking about children. وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ, that when the girl that was buried alive will be asked, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ, with what crime was she murdered? The Quranic discourse is very clear to people who read it. Allah says, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا, and we would not take a people to task unless they had a messenger. So this is in line with the whole holistic reading of the Quran. Okay, so just to be very clear, and verses kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra, I mean a hadith, the Sunan teaching that all children are born upon a kind of natural constant. They have this kind of homeostasis, this default setting to them, if you like, a status, which means that they are not upon any faith, they are upon fitrah. And some people translate this as every child is born a Muslim. That's not true. But every child is born on the state of fitrah, on this natural disposition. So they cannot be taken to task. Okay, you would go against that. That's the clear understanding as I'm presenting it. There have been several scholars that have said this. Other scholars have disagreed. I'm not denying that, and I'll take a look at it in a moment. But I'm just being very clear from the get-go that this is what the ruling is, people. Anything that other people say, it is not gospel, it is not the Quran, and I will demonstrate that it is not even these hadith, do not stand any weight. Okay, so just because some scholars said it does not make it so. Okay, so just to be very clear about that. Right, so okay, right, now let's zoom back in to this hadith. Right, so there is a hadith that is transmitted in Abu Dawood. It has two narrations in Abu Dawood, and there is another similar hadith that supports this in the Musnad of Ahmad. Okay, so in Abu Dawood's riwayah, there is from Ibrahim ibn, we've got Ibrahim ibn Musa al-Razi, from Yahya ibn Abi Za'idah, from his father Zakaria ibn Abi Za'idah, from Amir al-Sha'bi, the famous tabi'i, قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he's transmitting direct. Obviously now he never met the Prophet. However, Abu Dawood then follows that up with a chain from Yahya ibn Abi Zakaria, Yahya ibn Zakaria ibn Abi Za'idah. So the same person from the earlier chain who says that his father Zakaria ibn Abi Za'idah tells him that Abu Ishaq as-Sabi'i tells him that Amir al-Sha'bi told him that he was told by Alqamah, who was told by Ibn Mas'ud from the Prophet, that al-Wa'idah, the woman who buried alive a child, wal-Maw'udah, and the child that was buried alive, finnar, that both are in the fire, that both are doomed. Now, this hadith is not sahih. Okay, and I will go into that in just a moment. But let's take a look at the other narration, which is in the Musnad of Ahmad. It is also transmitted not in Sahih Bukhari, but Bukhari brings it in his book of narrators, in his Tarikh. He brings it there just to support something, but it's not in his Sahih. It's in the Musnad of Ahmad. And that is why it's transmitted from Muhammad ibn Abi Adi, from Dawood ibn Abi Hind, from Sha'bi once again, from Alqamah, from Salmat ibn Yazid. Now Salmat ibn Yazid says, I went with my brother. Now in some narrations we hear his brother's name was Qais. He says, I went with my brother and we approached the Prophet. And we said, Inna ummana Mulaika. So their mother, Salma, as some people have said, but her name is Mulaika. They tell the Prophet that she used to be a good woman, that she would, she would make sure that she, visited relatives and did this and did charitable acts and did these kind of things. What is her outcome? And the Prophet says that she is doomed. And apparently they knew who they were talking about. So this woman, that she had buried her child alive. So they then mention that, she had buried our sister alive in Jahiliyyah. So what about the sister? So for example, they ask. And apparently in this hadith, the same thing, al-wa'idatu wal-maw'udatu fin-nar, that both of them are in the fire, illa an tudrika al-wa'ida al-Islam, unless the culprit reaches an age of Islam, not an age, but reaches Islam and embraces Islam. And then maybe God will forgive her. Now this hadith is not sahih either. Now I'm going to come back to that one. Let's go to the first one. Before I mention how this hadith is weak, just to remember that, look, people, whenever we see a hadith, the principle, the three golden rules, the golden principles, it cannot clash with the Quran. Okay, it cannot go against reason, and it cannot uproot an Islamic principle. So let's just take it reason. First of all, it's utterly unreasonable. How can you punish an innocent child who's blameless? Okay, it goes against reason clearly. You know, ما لم يبين المعقول, the first principle. Second, لم يخالف المنقول, it cannot go against the Quran or the inherited tradition. The Quran, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ, when the buried alive girl is asked, with what crime was she killed? The Quran is clearly demonstrating the innocence of the child. Right, and all the other verses as well, some of which we've cited already. The principle in Islam, which falls under istishab wal-hal as an asl, or al-bara'at al-asliya, that a person is always innocent and they cannot be liable until either proven guilty, or a child has bara'at al-asliya until they reach puberty or they become of age. Okay, so that's an Islamic principle. Now it clashes with all three. Okay, this hadith is utterly unacceptable. But now let's take a look at the chain in this. Now Yahya ibn Abi Za'idah, first of all, he is somebody who passes away in 182 Hijri, who transmits the first Abu Dawud narration, and he's one of the first people to actually author in hadith in Kufa. Now a lot of people say he's very trustworthy and things like this, and but Abu Zur'a al-Razi says something interesting about him. He says he's a great person, very reliable. However, if he did, he says he hardly made a mistake. قَلَّمَا يُخْطِئ. But فَإِذَا أَخْطَأ, if he did make a mistake, أَتَى بِالْعَظَائِمِ, he made catastrophic mistakes. If he did make an error, it was a cataclysmic one. So that's something to remember. The next transmitter, the next one we're going to look at is Zakaria ibn Abi Za'idah. Now, first of all, people are just okay about him. Like Abu Hatim says, he's layyin al-hadith. He would purposely kind of blag certain chains, drop people, do tadlis. Ibn Ma'in says he's okay, swaylih. That means he's just about. Abu Zur'a says he was yudallisu kathiran. He would blag a lot, especially when transmitting from Sha'bi. And who does this come from? Sha'bi. Okay. Sha'bi himself, although he's a great tabi'i, somebody who passes away in 103 Hijri, however, there's so many narrations he would do, but he'd never ever heard from the people. He would transmit from many Sahaba. Like he transmits from Aisha, Ibn Mas'ud, Usama ibn Zayd, Ali, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Zayd ibn Thabit. And all of these companions, despite having seen them, he never actually heard from them. Or Ibn Umar, he transmits from these people, but he never actually ever saw them. And in that chain, the missing person, As-Sabi'i, Abu Ishaq As-Sabi'i, is somebody who's well known to do tadlis. Dhahabi also mentions that at a later age his memory messed up. Ibn Hajar mentions that he had dementia, اختلط بأخرى, that he caught dementia at a later age in life. So this is the chain that such a narration and such audacity is based on something as weak as a spider's web, people. And let's take a look at the other chain. The other chain, first of all, Muhammad ibn Abi Adi, who Abu Hatim in the Mizan says, La yuhtajju bi, you can't even use him as an evidence. Then, who's transmitting from Dawood ibn Abi Hind, who Bukhari, by the way, avoided altogether, and who Mazzi says used to mix things up massively. Kana kathir al-ittirab wal-khilaf. Al-Athram, the student of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, says kana kathir al-ittirab wal-khilaf. And Ibn Hajar says at a later age he would make mistakes. Kana yahm. Right, now, okay, what are some more interesting things about this hadith? First of all, Ibn Wazir, the great muhaddith, says this hadith is da'if. We cannot accept it, people. Not accept it. He also, what's also interesting is Abu Bakr al-Bazzar in his Bahr al-Zakhar mentions this hadith, هذا الحديث لا نعلم أحدا جوده إلا ابن أبي زائدة. It's only Ibn Abi Za'idah, he claims, who only, said this, basically kind of winged this hadith. But that's a claim from Bazzar, put that aside. Ibn al-Wazir has an interesting discussion on this. He claims that not only is this chain utterly unacceptable for the people in it, he brings to our attention a fascinating point here, people. Ibn al-Jawzi had mentioned whilst commenting on this hadith that Ibn Sa'ad in the Tabaqat highlights that these two brothers, Salmat ibn Yazid and his brother Qais, had actually, Ibn Sa'ad in his Tabaqat brings that they had renounced Islam. They weren't Muslim. They had apostated from Islam. Now, and this, when they came to the Prophet, they were most likely apostates. This thing that Ibn al-Jawzi says maybe they returned to Islam, we don't know. Ibn al-Wazir says you can't just make a claim they became Muslim unless you have clear evidence that they became Muslim. But we do know from Ibn Sa'ad's transmission that they had left Islam. They had apostated, which is a fascinating discussion in and of itself because it shows the Prophet did not call to their execution. Right, so that's an interesting discussion to show that kind of angle. Nevertheless, coming back to this discussion, it clearly shows that look at what this chain is based on. So allegedly the two people are apostates who don't, as Ibn Sa'ad highlights, they don't actually, they're not even Muslim people who not only, it's not that they weren't Muslim, but they'd rejected Islam after having embraced it. From them, you've got the likes of Dawood ibn Abi Hind, who's rejected by many people. He's weakened. I mentioned here that he used to mess things up. He was kathir al-ittirab. Bukhari avoided him. Then you've got Muhammad ibn Abi Adi, who also Abu Hatim says la yuhtajju bih. Okay, in his Mizan. So this is what this is resting on. Another spider's web. It's a cobweb. There's nothing to it. It has no solid ground on which it's based, and hence Ibn al-Wazir, the great muhaddith, says that look, la yathbut, this hadith in and of, he says I sought every chain in an attempt to maybe see can this hadith stand up, and every chain I looked at collapsed. And that was the wording of Ibn al-Wazir. So these hadith people are utterly unacceptable. Okay. Now, what about this ruling of the children of the mushrikeen, children of disbelievers? Now, there's a bunch of opinions that the scholars have come up with. Ibn Hajar brings up to about 10 opinions. Ibn al-Qayyim brings about 8 in his Ahkam, Ahl al-Dhimma. The point is that, look, scholars have come up with all kinds of stuff. Yeah? Some of them have said, what it is God will test them on the Day of Judgment. So they have, this is like what Ibn Taymiyyah and people end up, and I think Ibn doesn't. But this is that understanding, that God will test them. You've got that understanding. You've got some people saying God would already know what they would have. So they are in the kind of pre-eternal knowledge of God. So God knows that hypothetically, had they grown up, they would have been good or bad, and according to that hypothetic knowledge, they would have been judged. That's an opinion. One opinion some scholars came up with, they will be the people of the A'raf, that they will forever remain in a limbo state, in this kind of limbo state, and then God will, just determine what to do with them. Some people said God will just decide arbitrarily on the day. Fi mashi'atillah, it's up to God. Some people said they will be in heaven serving people in paradise. They will be the servants in heaven. All of these opinions, they may be based on certain interpretations. Okay, I'm not saying they're not based on some interpretations. Some people said they will be in hell. And I think even Ibn Hazm may have kind of inclined to that, saying because they will be with their fathers, with their own parents, and so on. And then there were scholars who said they will just be in paradise. or they will have salvation, just categorically and unconditionally. And that is, people, the simple answer. All these kind of 9 other opinions that you've got, it's people just using their brain on overtime. It's nonsensical. But people have said it. I'm not going to deny. People have said those kind of opinions. You're going to have people. Some people just did tawaqquf. One of the opinions was, "Oh, we don't know. It's up to God." And people like Abdullah ibn Mubarak, Hamad ibn Zayd, Hamad ibn Salma, Ishaq ibn Rahaway. All these kind of people were like that. Even Ibn Abdul Barr kind of went that way. Yet when Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was asked that what about the children of the mushrikeen, he said, هَذَا لَا يَخْتَلِفُ فِيهِ أَحَدٍ. He said there is no disagreement amongst anyone that they are fil Jannah, they are in paradise, that they have salvation. And that is the clear understanding, people. You will have some people, like I said, who said they will be doomed, and they were mainly the Azariqa from the Khawarij. They were a group of that extreme sect I spoke about earlier on when I was asked about the ruling of only the laws of God, that strict adherence, that you can't make up any laws unless they're clearly stated in the Quran, etc. That group, the Khawarij, they had a bunch of them were known as the Azariqa. They had this thing that children, it doesn't matter if they're from the kuffar, they are doomed. And some Hanbalis, because some Hanbalis were also very they had a harsh kind of persona and personality to them, went that way. But Imam Ahmad himself was very clear that they have salvation. People like Ibn Taymiyyah, they went to this thing that God would test them in the afterlife. To me, that makes no sense, because in the afterlife is not an abode to be tested. And then that's not fair. Why not retest the other people? And I know they will say, well, God doesn't have to be fair, but to me that does not then make any sense. And the deen is a deen of sense. It is a deen of reason. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense. I wanted to wrap that up. That look, these 2 hadith, the one in Abu Dawood and the one in Musnad of Ahmad of Al-Wa'ida wal-Ma'udatu fi an-Nar, are nonsensical. They are false hadith. They rest on just utterly weak, they just rest on rubble. There is no foundations, simply cobwebs. وَإِنَّ أَوْهَنَ الْبُيُوتِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ لَبَيْتُ الْأَنْكَبُوتِ. You see, the cobwebs are the weakest of foundations, people. And when you look at the Quran and Sunnah and the authentic ahadith, and you look, or the Sunnah that is transmitted, the Islamic principles of innocence, of no liability until a certain age, it's very clear that children are always of salvation. Cool. That wraps that discussion up. So let's take some questions now. Let's take some